welcome back to Sleepbound. In tonight's episode, the walls of Downton feel a little less secure as truth and duty come crashing down on everyone, upstairs and downstairs alike. The Duke of Crowborough reveals his true colors, Mary faces a crushing disappointment, and Bates is forced to say his goodbyes. Or is he? Meanwhile, the Crawleys receive news that will change everything. A new heir has been found, and his arrival will turn their world upside down. Get comfortable, let your mind drift, and let Downton Abbey carry you off to sleep. Chapter 16: Unwelcome Truths. In the dining room, the candles burned low, their flames reflecting in the polished surface of the table. Robert and Crowborough remained seated, cigar smoke swirling and coiling around them like spectral tendrils. Robert rose, signaling the end of their after-dinner ritual. "We must go through and let the servants get in here," he said. "I should be grateful if we could stay for just a minute more," Crowborough requested. "I have something to ask you." Robert nodded and resumed his seat, curiosity evident in his expression. "I was terribly sorry to hear about your cousins," the Duke began. "You said. Did you know them?" "Not well. I used to see Patrick Crawley at the Odd Thing." A tension settled between them, the Duke's hesitation betraying the calculation behind his sympathetic facade. "I imagine it will mean some adjustments for all of you," he continued cautiously. "To lose 2 heirs in one night. It's terrible." "Indeed, it was terrible," Robert agreed, his tone giving nothing away. "Awful," Crowborough nodded, "but then again, it's an ill wind." He offered a half-smile that Robert did not return, making no effort to ease the younger man's evident discomfort. "At least Lady Mary's prospects must have rather improved," Crowborough suggested. "Have they? Haven't they?" Robert poured himself another glass of port, studying the fortune hunter across the table with barely concealed distaste. The thought struck him. Was it right that Downton should be broken up and destroyed for this non-entity? The answer came to him with perfect clarity. It was not. "I will not be coy and pretend I do not understand your meaning," Robert stated flatly, "though you seem very informed on this family's private affairs." Crowborough remained silent, caught off guard by the Earl's directness. "But you ought perhaps to know that I do not intend to fight the entail. Not any part of it." "You can't be serious," the Duke replied, shock evident in his voice. "It pains me to say it, but I am." "You'll give up your entire estate? Your wife's money into the bargain, to a perfect stranger?" Crowborough demanded incredulously. "You won't even put up a fight?" His indignation revealed the extent of his calculations. "I hope he proves perfect, but I rather doubt it," Robert replied dryly. "Huh, it is an odd thing to joke about." "No odder than this conversation," Robert countered. "So there you have it. But Mary will still have her settlement, which you won't find ungenerous." "I'm sorry?" Crowborough asked, confusion momentarily replacing his shock. "I mean only that her portion on her marriage will be more than respectable," Robert explained pointedly. "You'll be pleased, I promise." An expression of alarm crossed the Duke's face as he realized how transparent his intentions had been. "Oh, heavens, I hope I haven't given the wrong impression." "You know very well the impression you've given," Robert replied coldly. "My dear Lord Grantham." "Don't my dear Lord Grantham me," Robert interrupted sharply. "You knew what you were doing when you came here. You've encouraged Mary all of us to think. Forgive me, but I came to express my sympathies and my friendship. Nothing more, Crowborough insisted smoothly. Lady Mary is a charming person. Whoever marries her will be a lucky man. He will not, however, be me. The two men regarded each other with mutual understanding, one contemptuous, the other calculating. I see, Robert said finally. And what was it that you asked me to stay behind to hear? Their eyes locked in silent challenge. I forget, Crowborough admitted, conceding defeat in this particular battle. Chapter 17. Secrets in the Attic. Robert walked through the hall without a backward glance, leaving the Duke standing alone. After a moment's hesitation, Crowborough approached the staircase, taking one of the candles from the table nearby to light his way through the dimly lit corridors. Aren't you coming into the drawing room? Mary's voice emerged from the shadows where she had been waiting, her elegant silhouette barely visible in the darkness. Crowborough's face betrayed momentary surprise before he composed himself. I'm tired. I think I'll just slip away. Please make my excuses. I'm afraid I've worn you out, Mary said, stepping forward into the pool of candlelight. Tomorrow we can just... I'm leaving in the morning, he interrupted, his voice flat and final. He stared at her, making no attempt to soften the blow. The sudden shift, from flirtation to rejection, hung between them like a physical presence. Good night, he said at last. Oh, you might tell that footman. Thomas, Mary supplied mechanically, her mind still processing what was happening. Thomas, you might tell him I've gone up. As he ascended the stairs, the light from his candle gradually fading, Edith emerged from a doorway. So he slipped the hook, she observed, a smile playing on her lips. At least I'm not fishing with no bait, Mary replied sharply, brushing past her sister toward the drawing room. Her words were cutting as ever, but the tears on her cheeks, hastily wiped away, betrayed the wound beneath her armor. In the Duke's bedroom, Thomas hung a dressing gown in the wardrobe with practiced efficiency. I don't believe that, he exclaimed, his tone strikingly familiar, as though speaking to an equal rather than the aristocrat he served. Well, believe what you like, Crowborough replied with a shrug. He won't break the entail. The unknown cousin gets everything, and Mary's inheritance will be the same as it always was. How was I to know? Thomas asked defensively. When the lawyer turned up, I thought. You couldn't have known, and you were right to send the telegram, the Duke assured him. But it's not going to come off. So what now? Thomas asked, uncertainty creeping into his voice. You know how I'm fixed, Crowborough sighed. I must have an heiress if I have to go to New York to find one. What about me? Thomas demanded, the question revealing the true nature of their relationship. He knelt to remove the Duke's shoes, a servant's task imbued with unexpected intimacy. You said you'd find me a job if I wanted to leave. And do you? Crowborough asked. I want to be a valet. I'm sick of being a footman. But I have a valet, the Duke pointed out. I thought you were trying to get rid of the new one here. I've done it, Thomas confirmed. But I'm not sure Carson's going to let me take over. He approached the Duke, his voice softening. And I want to be with you. Their embrace revealed the depth of their connection, a dangerous secret in a world that condemned such relationships. Yet the Duke's response was measured, detached. I can't see it working. We don't seem to have the basis of a servant-master relationship. He kissed his fingers with casual indifference. Thomas's expression hardened. You came here to be with me. Among other reasons, Crowborough admitted. But one swallow doesn't make a summer. Aren't you forgetting something? Thomas asked, his voice taking on a threatening edge. The Duke smiled, unfazed by the implicit blackmail. What? Are you threatening me? Because of a youthful dalliance? A few weeks of madness in a London season? You wouldn't hold that against me, surely? I would if I have to, Thomas replied coldly. Who'd believe a greedy footman against the word of a duke? Crowborough challenged. If you're not very careful, you'll end up behind bars. I've got proof, Thomas countered. The Duke opened a drawer and removed a bundle of letters, waving them almost tauntingly. You mean these? Thomas lunged for them, but Crowborough was quicker. He threw the letters into the fire and held Thomas back with surprising strength as the papers curled and blackened in the flames. I'm grateful, the Duke said, releasing him once the evidence was destroyed. My mother's always telling me never to put anything in writing, and now, thanks to you, I never will again. How did you get them, you bastard? Thomas seethed, watching his leverage turn to ash. Don't be a bad loser, Thomas. Go to bed, Crowborough advised coolly, unless you want to stay. Thomas's withering glare was answer enough as he stormed out. The Duke watched him go without concern, already mentally moving on to his next conquest. Chapter 18. Farewell and Second Chances. In Mrs. Hughes's sitting room, the housekeeper sat by the fire when Carson looked in to say good night. I think I'll turn in, he announced. No big announcement, then? Mrs. Hughes inquired. No, nor likely to be. He's off on the 9 o'clock train. He never is, she exclaimed, genuinely surprised. And when we've had a turkey killed for tomorrow's dinner. Thomas says he's packed already, Carson confirmed. I wonder what she did wrong, Mrs. Hughes mused. She did nothing wrong, Carson defended loyally, not from the way his lordship was talking. So his grace turned out to be graceless, she suggested, with gentle humor. Carson didn't find such wordplay amusing. Good night, Mrs. Hughes. Good night, Mr. Carson, she replied, watching him go with a knowing smile. In the quiet sanctuary of their bedroom, Robert and Cora lay side by side, the soft glow of the bedside lamps casting warm shadows across the elegant furnishings. If you knew that was your decision, why put Mary through it? Cora asked, her voice tinged with reproach. I didn't know it was my decision, my final decision until tonight, Robert explained. But I find I cannot ruin the estate and hollow out the title for the sake of Mary, even with a better man than that. I try to understand, I just can't. Why should you? Robert replied with sudden fervor. Downton is in my blood and in my bones. It's not in yours, and I can no more be the cause of its destruction than I could betray my country. Cora's expression revealed a complex mixture of admiration and irritation at her husband's devotion to his ancestral home. Besides, how was I to know he wouldn't take her without the money? Robert added. Don't pretend to be a child because it suits you, Cora chided. Do you think she would have been happy with a fortune hunter? She might have been, Robert conceded. I was, Cora replied simply. The admission of this unspoken truth brought Robert up short. After a moment, he sat on the edge of the bed and took her hand in his. Have you been happy? Really? Have I made you happy? Yes, Cora answered, her voice softening. That is, since you fell in love with me. A trace of mischief entered her expression, which, if I remember correctly, was about a year after we married. Not a year, Robert objected gently. Not as long as that. He raised her hand to his lips in a gesture of tenderness. After a moment, his expression grew serious again. But it wouldn't have happened for Mary. Why not? Because I'm so much nicer than the Duke of Crowborough, Robert replied with unexpected humor. I'll be the judge of that, Cora countered, her eyes warm with affection. She lowered the lamp wick and blew it out, settling into the comfortable familiarity of their shared bed. But don't think I'm going to let it rest, Robert. I haven't given up by any means. I must do what my conscience tells me, he insisted. And so must I, Cora replied with equal determination, and I don't want you to think I'll let it rest. Robert sighed as he extinguished his own lamp, plunging the room into darkness. For all their differences, they were well-matched adversaries and partners. Morning arrived with clear skies and birdsong. Carson crossed the hall just as Robert descended the stairs, Pharaoh at his heels. Would it be acceptable for Bates to ride in front with Taylor? Carson inquired. Otherwise, it means getting the other car out. He and his Grace are catching the same train. Perfectly acceptable, Robert decided. And if his Grace doesn't like it, he can lump it. Carson's lips twitched in what might almost have been a smile as he went to arrange the departure. Outside, beneath the grand portico, Crowborough stood with Cora, exchanging the formal pleasantries that masked their mutual dislike. You've been so kind, Lady Grantham. Thank you, he said smoothly. Goodbye, Duke, Cora replied, her voice cold as she extended her hand with stiff formality. You'll make my farewells to your delightful daughters, he requested. They'd have been down if they'd known you were leaving so soon, she pointed out, the subtle rebuke clear in her tone. Alas, something's come up, which has taken me quite by surprise, Crowborough offered as explanation. Obviously, Cora replied, making no effort to hide her skepticism. Robert emerged from the house with Pharaoh trotting beside him. Well, Grantham, this has been a highly enjoyable interlude, the Duke declared with forced cheerfulness. Has it? Robert countered. And I feared it had proved a disappointment. Not at all, not at all, Crowborough assured him. A short stay in your lovely house has driven away my cares. He caught Thomas's eye as the footman secured the luggage, the brief exchange laden with meaning that only they understood. The other servants stood in attendance as Taylor, the chauffeur, waited by the open car door. We ought to go, my lord, Taylor advised, if his Grace is to catch the train. Robert walked over to where Bates stood near the car. Goodbye, Bates, and good luck. Good luck to you, my lord, Bates replied, dignity intact despite his circumstances. Crowborough entered the car, and Taylor shut the door behind him before taking his place behind the wheel. Bates joined him in the front, his meager possessions clutched on his lap. The car had barely begun to move when Robert suddenly called out, "Wait!" The vehicle halted. Robert ran forward, opening Bates's door and pulling the case from the valet's lap. "Get out, Bates," he commanded. From inside the car, Crowborough protested. "I don't want to be late." Robert ignored him completely, holding the door open expectantly. A shocked Carson hurried forward to close the car door after Bates exited, and Taylor drove away with the Duke. "Get back inside," Robert told Bates, his decision made. "And we'll say no more about it." Bates took his case and obeyed, relief and gratitude evident in every line of his face. From the steps, Cora observed this reversal with resignation before turning back into the house. Carson dispersed the other servants, though not before Thomas and O'Brien had exchanged looks of undisguised fury. Anna's face, by contrast, shone with quiet joy. "It wasn't right, Carson," Robert explained simply. "I just didn't think it was right." Carson nodded in understanding, recognizing that some bonds transcended the rigid hierarchies they all lived by. Chapter 19. The New Heir. A quiet, respectable house on the outskirts of the city, the Crawley home was a world away from the grandeur of Downton Abbey. It was neat, practical, and comfortably middle class, a home of industry, not inheritance. Inside the dining room, Matthew Crawley sat at the breakfast table, absorbed in the Times. A cup of tea sat untouched beside him, the Morning Post stacked neatly to his right. Across from him, his mother, Isabel Crawley, watched him with a knowing gaze. "You've barely touched your toast." Matthew glanced up absently. "I suppose I'm not very hungry." Isabel reached for the letter, resting beside his paper, her fingers grazing the wax seal. "So, Lord Grantham has written." Matthew exhaled. "He has." Isabel tilted her head, and Matthew set down his paper and rubbed his temples. "It's exactly what we thought. With the death of his heir, He hesitated, still struggling to say it aloud. "I am now next in line to inherit the estate." Isabel studied him carefully. "And how do you feel about that?" Matthew gave a short, humorless laugh. "How do I feel? Well, it's absurd for a start. I've never even met these people, and now I'm expected to... What? Take over their lives? Their home?" His mother smiled slightly. "Our home now, Matthew." He ran a hand through his hair, leaning back in his chair. "If you ask me, it's outdated. The idea that land and title must pass to a male heir rather than a daughter. It's ridiculous." Isabel arched a brow. "Then you should fit right in." Matthew let out a low sigh. "I don't want to be part of their world." Isabel studied her son, her expression softening. "Perhaps it's not about what you want. Perhaps it's about duty." Matthew's jaw tightened. "Duty to what? To a system I don't believe in?" His mother's gaze did not waver. "Duty to your future." Matthew fell silent, his mind racing. He had worked for everything in his life. He had studied, built a career, created a future of his own making, and now, with one letter, that future had been rewritten. Isabel poured herself another cup of tea, her voice gentle but firm. "We should go, Matthew." He looked at her sharply. "Go?" "To Downton. We should see it, meet them." Matthew scoffed. "And what? Play the part of the grateful heir?" Isabel smiled faintly. "Or decide for yourself if it's truly something you can walk away from." Matthew exhaled heavily, rubbing a hand over his face. He had the sinking feeling that this was not going to end the way he wanted. Thanks so much for joining me tonight. I hope this story has brought you a little peace and relaxation. As always, feel free to drift off whenever you're ready.
Did I make the most of loving you? So many things we didn't do. Did I give you all my heart could give? To unlived lives with lives to live. When these endless lonely days are through, I'll make the most of loving you. I'll make the most of loving you. Did we make the most of all we had? Not seeing you makes my heart sad. Did we make the most of summer days? We still have time to change our ways. When these endless lonely days are through, I'll make the most of loving you. 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 Did those tender words stay in my head? So many things were left unsaid. Did I give you all my heart could give? To unlived lives with lives to live. When these endless lonely days are through, I'll make the most of loving you. I'll make the most of loving you. I'll make the most of loving you. I'll make the most of loving you.